Bluegrass Jamalong is proud to be sponsored by Collins Guitars and Mandolins, each and every one built from the sound up in Austin, Texas. This episode is also brought to you by Peghead Nation, the home of roots music instruction. If you want to improve your playing, join me and thousands of other pickers getting better every day at pegheadnation.com. Hi, this is Matt, and you're listening to Bluegrass Jamalong, the podcast for anyone and everyone who loves bluegrass. My guests on Bluegrass Jamalong this week are Ruth Oxenberg and Rob Schumer, and I got an email from Ruth a few weeks ago asking if we could have a chat about a series of concerts that they're curating called Bluegrass on Hudson, which sound fascinating, so I was very much up for that. But they also directed a movie called Bluegrass Journey, which was one of the first things I watched when I got into bluegrass, and I've seen it several times. I watched it again today, actually, and I absolutely love it. So we're going to talk about that too. And I'm really looking forward to this. Welcome to the podcast, guys.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Indeed.
I guess we will start with Bluegrass Journey, and we can talk about your bluegrass journey as we go through the movie and on towards doing these gigs you've been putting together. I guess my first sort of starting point is to find out how you two got into the bluegrass scene in the first place, because Bluegrass Journey came out in 2003, right? And it took a few years to put together. So this is something that's been a big part of your life for a long time now.
Right.
It definitely has. It's amazing how many years, really, how central it's been to our entire married lives. Certainly, we're celebrating our 30th anniversary married this summer. And in fact, it all started with having a bluegrass band for our wedding. Rob can tell the story, but basically he's a musician, has been a guitar player his entire life, and tell a little bit about that.
Yeah. So as Ruth says, the funny thing is that bluegrass is sort of contemporary, sort of, what's the word? Sort of coexistent with our entire married life from the inception right to the very present moment. But I've been playing rock and roll and jazz and classical guitar for years and years as a young fellow, and had studied with a guy named John Carlini, who's a wonderful jazz guitarist who had been a lot of people who listen to this podcast will know him as the first guitarist who worked with David Grisman before Tony Rice came along in the early years when the quintet was first coming together. And I studied jazz guitar with him just after he had left that Bay Area, California scene and became the musical director of the Ice Capades. But in his spare time, he was teaching jazz guitar, and he had played at a wedding that I had asked him as my teacher to play for a friend of mine with a beautiful, intimate, acoustic group that he put together for the event. And when Ruth and I decided to get married, there were a lot of things that we saw it the same way, but one of them was that we didn't want a big, loud rock and roll band where nobody could hear one another. Mm-hmm. That was out. So I suggested something along the lines of what John had put together for my friend David's wedding. Ruth loved it, and she had some exposure to bluegrass fiddle. Had been to, a fiddler's convention somewhere in Vermont when she was in college. Craftsbury. And the other element was that I had stumbled in the early 70s, April of 73. I was at a Grateful Dead concert. I was going to the Dead quite a lot in those years. And they played in Eugene, Oregon with Old and in the Way opening for them. So I just stumbled over Peter Rowan and Grisman. I think it was Peter. Peter might have been playing on Vassar that night, but and Jerry and the whole shebang. So that was in my floating around in my brain somewhere. So we decided that we would have an acoustic, and why not a bluegrass band? Even though we didn't know too much about it at that time. We're talking about the early 90s now. So I'll pass over to Ruth for where the story continues for our wedding. but it leads directly into the film, you'll see.
So our wedding was in July, and we had local caterers, and they said, "Oh, you want bluegrass? Your wedding is the same weekend as the Bluegrass Festival. You should call the Rothboss Farm. That's where the Bluegrass Festival is." So we didn't know anything about it. I look in the phone book. There are about 20 Rothbosses. I mean, it's a rural area. It's many, many families. And I get from one Rothboss to another. And finally, somebody says, "Oh, yeah, you need to call this lady Mary Daub. She's in Baltimore. She runs the Bluegrass Festival." So I call this person in Baltimore. I have no idea who it is. And it turns out it's Mary Daub, who is the producer and founder of Winterhawk, and which, of course, is now Grey Fox. And Mary Daub, being Mary, took my call instantly, couldn't have been more generous, said, "Oh, yeah, you need to, call this guy in Nashville. He represents a lot of bluegrass bands. Keith Case, here's his number. He'll send you some links." And then there's some other people too. So that's your phone, I think. So sorry about that. That's his ringtone. I think
we're leaving that in the final episode. That's great.
Yeah, we're really obsessed. So I called Keith Case of Keith Case and Associates, not knowing anything. He says, "Oh yeah, I'll send you some tapes." We get an audio cassette of the McCoury Band, who were playing would have played a wedding back then. I mean, their agent was sending them, a wedding gig potentially. So, long story short, we ended up hiring a local band from Gloucester, Massachusetts called Old Cold Tater, who were fantastic, who were at the Bluegrass Festival Winterhawk. And we had a wonderful wedding. And the next year we went to this so-called Bluegrass Festival. Neither of us had ever been to a Bluegrass Festival before. And we just had our minds blown. The intimacy, the location, the beautiful event, the music, it just was remarkable.
Well, I'll just back up. After our wedding, when we had, from Keith and from some other sources, we'd been gifted with a number of audition tapes of a whole bunch of different bands, and then we had our wedding. We had a wonderful event, and we just fell into it. And there's the proverbial story that a lot of people tell of being hit over the back of their head with a banjo, and sort of changes their life forever. Some kind of concussion that turns into a love of bluegrass music for the rest of their eternity. That happened to us. So we started listening up a storm. And at this point, a year later, when we went to Winterhawk for the first time, we encountered a whole bunch of wonderful artists and stars that we had spent the year immersing ourselves in. So the next thing that happened was that, at this point, I'm a physician by day, and Ruth at that time was a television news producer working at World News Tonight with Peter Jennings, which was at the time one of, if not the premier evening news program in the States. Your American listeners of a certain age will all know it well, that program. And she was working at, as I say, and we had the idea that it would be a fun thing for her to try to pitch a story idea about bluegrass music to the show, which she did.
So I pitched it to Peter Jennings. It was summertime, and it turned out that his son had a bluegrass radio show at his boarding school. And Peter flipped for the idea. He said, "Yeah, absolutely. This would be a great story for the summer. Let's do it." So the next thing you know, I'm on a plane to Telluride Bluegrass Festival with a ABC News correspondent, Beth Nissen. And you weren't able, you came on the shoot. Rob came along on the shoot.
Yeah, I tagged along.
And we had 4 or 5 days in Telluride shooting this piece for ABC News with, professional camera people, sound people, the whole deal.
And the funny thing was, as I recall, ABC News descends on the Telluride Bluegrass Festival. Well, that's a big deal for the bluegrass industry. So the next thing you know, we're in the corner suite of some, terrific hotel in Telluride, interviewing Bela Fleck, Sam Bush, Mark Schatz, Jerry Douglas,
Tim O'Brien. We shot
folks.
Tony Trishka, Earl Scruggs. We shot, it was interviews and performance. It was just, we were just bang right in the middle of it. And how lucky, the doors just opened. Everybody was all excited. We were thrilled beyond belief.
Now, this would have been 1996, which was as Ruth was going around conducting interviews with these artists. She and Allison, you interviewed, and
Alison Krauss, not at Telluride, but later on we did a interview and filmed the performance.
And so Ruth learned that I'll call him Mr. Monroe was very ill at this point in his final illness, as it turned out. And as people in no giving away the secret here, but as people in the media, news media do, they prepare obituaries in advance when it's anticipated. And so Ruth had put together an obituary for Bill Monroe.
As I was interviewing Allison and
She would ask
Sam and Bela, I would ask them questions about Bill Monroe.
And got some stock
and
footage,
I had material.
footage and so forth, and new interview material, and put together an obit for the air as well. So come to find that her piece about the astonishing, as Peter Jennings called it, the astonishing popularity of bluegrass music. This was before Oh Brother, but nevertheless, it was astonishing. She had a piece that aired on national news, and then 2 weeks later, Mr. Monroe died, and the obituary played. It was ready to go. And so either a week apart or
2 weeks, I
2
think
weeks
it
at
was.
most,
Yeah.
there were two fairly major pieces about bluegrass music on national news that Ruth had caused to happen. So she was now a fairly significant media personality in the bluegrass industry, which was sort of odd to find ourselves
Funny.
finding it funny. But while we're shooting for her piece, I'm there being kind of like a field producer for her, because I'm just having the time of my life. I mean, as I say, I'm a doctor, so getting out and sort of hanging around a bluegrass festival with a camera crew from ABC News was sort of, just terrific fun for me. And I'd gotten an ear for the music, being a player and so forth. So I was walking around with some of the camera guys while they were shooting and pointing out interesting things and so forth. And there was this camera guy that was working for ABC News as part of the shoot for the first piece about the astonishing popularity of bluegrass music. And at some point, it was this, as I recall, he was either a native, a Greek national or a Greek American. Does that sound right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And we're shooting, and there we are, the sun's going down. People are picking all over the hill. People are grilling and frying and showering, as they do at bluegrass festivals, and homemade, beautiful hot water outdoor showers. And everybody's just having the time of their lives. And the guy turns to me and says, "This is unbelievable what I'm seeing here. This is so American. I can't believe what I'm seeing. This isn't a piece for network news. This is a feature-length film," he says to me. So that day, going home in the car, I repeat to Ruth what this fellow had said to me. And I said, he's absolutely right. And you and I could do it. I mean, between our skills, your skill as a producer, my skills as a player, and I was a pretty committed and serious amateur photographer, and as well. And we're both sort of can-do people. We could make a documentary film about bluegrass. And it took Ruth about a microsecond to say, that's a terrific idea. And next thing you know, we're figuring out how to do it.
We'll be right back with you just after this. Collings Guitars has been a long-time supporter of the bluegrass community, from collaborating with artists to sponsoring festivals big and small, and now by sponsoring Bluegrass Jam-Along. Handmade in Austin, Texas, every Collings guitar and mandolin that leaves the shop is built from the sound up, and the team loves seeing a Collings in the hands of players of all levels, from local musicians to world-renowned pickers. Visit collingsguitars.com for more. This episode is also brought to you by Peghead Nation, the home of roots music instruction. With 65 streaming video courses for guitar, mandolin, banjo, fiddle, dobro, bass and ukulele from some of the leading names in acoustic music, Peghead Nation has something for every picker. You'll learn the tunes and techniques you need to join in at jams and play the music you love, plus advanced techniques like improvisation, theory and ear training. Your first course is just $20 per month, and you can add more for $10 a month. Sign up for any course and get your first month free with the promo code JAMALONG, all one word. Join thousands of other players, including me, who are advancing on their instruments and having more fun playing the roots music they love at pegheadnation.com.
So it took 7 years. And we first, again, through Mary Dowd, we connected with her, her daughter-in-law's brother, Gil Holland, who was quite an established independent documentary film producer in New York. And Gil advised us on, you set up a company and you look for investors. And so we went through this whole structuring of the thing and went out looking for, what did I call them? Bluegrass junkies with cash, just finding people with money and basically just pitching this idea and cobbled it together. The big fish was Warren Hellman, who put on, he's gone now, Hardly Strictly Bluegrass. If that was his festival in San Francisco, he's a huge appreciator of the music of Hazel Dickens fan, but comes from like the Levi Strauss family or something in San Francisco. And it was a fun thing with him where I wrote him a letter cold and he sent me a check for $50 and said, good luck. And I thought, well, this is very nice that this strange man has just sent me $50, but that's not really all I need. So I wrote to him again. And a couple of months later, another check for like $500 came. And I thought the same thing. And this time I said, I'm going to use this $500 to buy a plane ticket to go out there and meet him in person. And there was a Down from the Mountain tour. That was a spinoff of Oh Brother. By now, Oh Brother had hit, and there was the spinoff tour.
Money.
We're still raising money. And I said, Warren, I'm coming to Berkeley to see a Down from the Mountain show. Are you going to be there? And he said, yes, I'll be in row M, seat 2 and 3. Come find me at intermission. So I took the 10 minutes at intermission and I found this man and we had a face-to-face for, 5 minutes or so.
The elevator pitch.
And then he gave us a lot of money and then he continued to sort of feed money. So it was, generously. Yeah, very generously. And there were other very generous investors. So we had enough money. And we hired crews that I'd worked with at ABC. So all professional camera people, all professional sound people. And we were lucky because this was all happening really before the iPhone. So the sort of revolution in everybody can make a movie because we all have cameras and we don't need professionals anymore. That hadn't happened yet. So we were working with incredibly talented, gifted photographers and sound recordists, and
tell them that about Nancy.
And then we found a fantastic editor, Nancy Kennedy, and she had won. Well, she'd worked on many Sundance award-winning documentary films and such. So she joined us, and we worked with her for 10 months, which again was a long time in the edit room, and we just went with really sort of a rough idea of what we wanted the film to look like. But Nancy went through every frame of footage and really built it like old school documentary film style. And we ended up giving her co-director credit because she did such a beautiful job creating a storyline out of it.
And here's another interesting aspect to it. You mentioned how long we'd spent. We spent, well, in those few years while we were raising money and letting the idea incubate, we were casting about for an angle, a storyline, and a look. And the storyline was hard because there wasn't really a narrative arc that we could think about. We didn't want to. High Lonesome, Rachel Liebling's wonderful film, had already been done, and it told the story of the origins of bluegrass. So that didn't need to be done again. But what we felt that we had responded to in getting drawn in was the excitement of the progressive development of the sounds of the music, dating back to earlier years even than, of course, the original Bill Monroe band in the 40s, in the late 40s. But it was continuing to evolve and continuing to draw in young, incredibly talented players. And we were witnessing this. And we thought that was a story worth telling, but we needed a look. And so as part of our study of the challenge of figuring this out, we watched every music documentary we could think of, and we just looking for inspiration, looking for models. And actually some friends of the family suggested at some point, you guys really, have you seen Jazz on a Summer's Day? Have you seen that film? And we hadn't. So we figured out a way to get a copy. And this was a film made, I think it was the 1958 Newport Jazz Festival by then a very young, first really brand new young filmmaker, a guy named Bert Stern, who went on to an enormously important career as a fashion photographer for Vogue. But at the time, he was just a jazz fan, kind of like we were bluegrass fans, and decided he just needed to make a film about Newport. And I don't know if you, Matt, have seen the film, or your listeners may have seen it or should if they haven't. It's a great film. It's a film that doesn't really it has no narrative voiceover. There's no real story to it. It's just a portrait of an amazing event on a beautiful day in July in 1958. And there are a lot of cutaways to the Newport yacht race as well, which was going on at the same time. So they're just beauty shots of the yachts. And then you cut back and it's nighttime or daytime, and it's Anita O'Day, and it's help me here. Thelonious Monk was there.
Extreme close-ups held for a very long time.
Well, that's the look. I'm mentioning the artist, but the artists don't matter. But that's right. The look was long holds and concentration on the beauty of the instruments, the wood, the brass, the keys.
The lips. I mean, Anita O'Day singing Sweet Georgia Brown, the shot is her lips and her mouth and her tongue, and you're just watching it's mesmerizing.
Coming out high as a kite on 5-inch heels and just killing it. And it's sort of, we said to ourselves that let the music speak for itself, let the performance. It's not about the artists. It's about the performance and the beauty of the physicality of the fingers on the frets, on the necks, on the bows, on the strings.
So we had the big day of the shoot, 7 cameras. Was the Saturday of Grey Fox weekend. We decided to focus the film primarily at Grey Fox, and then also at IBMA, and then in Nashville a bit. But the big performance shooting was at Grey Fox. And so Saturday we had 7 cameras. We had a boom. We had
tripods.
Yeah, it was a big deal. A lot of money for our low budget film. And of course we woke up in the morning, and as is typical of Grey Fox, it was pouring.
People who were at the festival that year, there are many legendary years in the history of that festival, but this is one of them. It rained
6 inches.
6 inches in 24 hours.
It didn't stop. I mean, it was like a
it was just
faucet
shower
coming down. So all of our best laid plans about where the cameras were going to be positioned, how we're going to do it, all was just thrown up in the air.
Ruth, being a pro, said to herself, "This is great."
Well, I knew suddenly we had a story. I had been worried that there was really no drama, and I was thinking Woodstock, the storm is the big. So we get to the festival, and again, Mary Dowd and all the people like Grey Fox Rousby, Hughes Perry, Mary Burdett, and Lisa Hughes, all of them. We're just like, do whatever you need to do, go wherever you need to do. The festival is yours. So suddenly we had our big cameras, and in these days they were like television beta cams. They're big, big things. Camera guys with these cameras on the stage, tiny little old stage. And the performers were all cool. And so Tony Rice said, "Okay, Tony, if we're just right in front of you on the stage." So we had our camera guy, Rob Van Prague, on his knees at Tony's lap, basically, shooting
performance of
Shenandoah. And
it's kind of legendary.
It just was lucky that, everything was aligned, and the vibe was right, and the attitude was right, and the support was there, and we could just be wherever we needed to be and get that kind of intimacy. Rob shot the beautiful scene. We were doing some shooting at that point. Yeah. Beautiful duet between Tim O'Brien and Daryl Scott.
Unwalk Beside Me.
It was gorgeous. Yeah. There's some really wonderful camera work in there, and a lot of it was, again, just thanks to how, willing everybody there was to work with us, artists and festival people. And
well, it's really interesting because I watched it again today just to remind myself, because it's been a while, and just talking about the close-ups and putting the music at the heart of it, and it makes me think of a couple of things, actually. But there's some of the shots of Tony Rice in particular. There's like a long close-up of his left hand while he's playing Cattle in the Cane with Peter Rowan, and just those fingers and the wood on that Martin, and just but that performance of Shenandoah, even when you just mentioned it, then the hairs on my arm stood up just thinking about it. It's like, it's such a but also it's dark by that point, so the world's got smaller, and there's nothing beyond this little bubble of music that's happening from one guy with a box of wood on a soaking wet stage in a field on a farm, and it's magic.
Yeah,
it's the astonishing thing. And I'm not watching it. Obviously, I'm not seeing the camera guy right in front of him. I'm just there, and that's what that movie does for me. I think is you talked right at the beginning of this about going to a festival and just being totally absorbed by it, and that the success of the documentary is it sort of allows you to do that from your armchair. You're seeing the mud and the barbecues and the kids rolling around on the floor and the glorious bits of intermittent sunshine and the music and the lovely bit where one woman goes, "I see a bit of sun up there, I'm an optimist," and it cuts straight to driving rain.
That's
and
Mary Dowd.
And it takes you there, and it makes you think, "Oh, I want to go there. I want to be there." And I think that's the beauty of it. It doesn't gloss over the music and just have a bunch of talking heads with captions constantly telling you who everybody is all the time. It lets you get a bit lost in it and lets it unfold and sort of drag you in, which is great, because sometimes a documentary can just be listening and reading people's names for an hour and a half, and it stops you getting immersed in that sort of way.
Yeah. Well, thanks for those nice words. And I'm sure Ruth agrees, but it feels like everything you just said is exactly what we would hope anyone watching it to feel. So it was very, I think it was a success. And a lot of credit to Nancy, the editor, who just did a fantastic job. But that was it. We wanted to bring you there. When we were going around, studying up in preparation for shooting, one of the things that we found ourselves privileged to be able to do was spend a lot of late nights in hotel rooms at places like IBMA in Owensboro, and then later on in Nashville, the International Bluegrass Music Association annual trade show and award ceremony and so forth. And again, because of the pieces that Ruth had put on air, and our growing relationships with people like Mary Daub and other people like her, like Barry Poss and Ken Irwin, the owners, Ken being one of the owners at the time of Sugar Hill Records and Rounder Records, who Mary had introduced us both to, and we had nice, very lovely relationships with for many years. But for lots of other reasons, we had great relationships that allowed us to entree to hang out in hotel rooms where people would be playing till all hours, and we'd be just hanging out on the couch, listening to some of the most amazing music you can imagine, just being played for joy by people who perhaps didn't normally play together, but had known each other for 30 years, but hadn't worked together for a long time, but crossed paths now and then. They were just hanging out and picking.
Yeah. Well, it was like,
that's what we wanted to show.
Tim O'Brien called us. We were at the IBMA festival in Owensboro. I think it was the last year it was there. It was 1996. Was it? Yeah. Yes. Tim O'Brien called us. He said, "Come to my room. I'm having a picking party." So we go in there, and there's the huddle, and there's Gillian Welch, David Rawlings, Tim Stafford,
Everett Lilly,
and us. Like, what are we doing there? But we were like we hung around stuff in the background. There's the inner core. And that actually is what gave us the sort of sense of, how amazing it is to be right next to these artists when they're playing. And you get a sense of that at bluegrass festivals and a lot of small venues. But to be able to just be in a room with them playing acoustic is a life-changing experience.
I mean, the thing as a player is, when you're playing in a group, you there's a wonderful camaraderie and sort of communication going on, playing with other people. But people at the highest professional level are doing that too when they're just hanging around and picking. And, but what they're doing, what I'm doing when I play with my friends is fun, and maybe it's even good sometimes. But what these guys are doing is, frequently of historic importance. I mean, they might be working on a new tune or an arrangement that then gets recorded and becomes, part of the tradition.
So while we were involved in all this, we got to know Scott Nygaard pretty well, and he was playing in Tim O'Brien's band at that point, Tim O'Brien and the O Boys.
And Mark Schatz.
And Mark Schatz and Molly O'Brien and sometimes Jerry Douglas. Anyway, so Scott told us about this phenomenon on the West Coast.
Actually, it was an article he wrote in Acoustic Guitar Magazine.
Right.
That's what it was.
Article for Acoustic Guitar Magazine, where he was then the writer, but he became the editor, about house concerts. And this notion of just, having a private concert in your own home. And we'd never heard about that certainly not in New York City. But at that point, we had moved up to this house in the country, and we were building an addition on our house. And again, probably Rob said, "Let's do that. We can do that." So we built a room, specifically a sort of large living room, which we call our music room, specifically to host concerts, to host house concerts. So we've been doing that for 20 plus 3 years, something like that.
And that sort of started soon after the film came out. We started having concerts in the home.
And that was inspired by being present at these very special picking parties and having that intimacy. So we've been able to recreate that experience in our home for our friends and friends of friends and family.
And our relationships with a lot of these artists that we've mentioned and other ones like them has been such that we've find ourselves on their maps in terms of they may be touring in the Northeast. We live in the Hudson Valley of New York State, and people coming through the area will either we'll be in touch with them, and we might say next time you're in the Northeast, you have an open night, or they may call us and say we're in the Northeast and we have an open night. We'll host a show, and so that's been a lot of fun for a couple of decades now. So then COVID happened, and the house concert had to stop. And then we slowly got back into it. But it was a little weird with masks and fans on in the upstairs and windows and open and all over the place. And we'd have a little party beforehand, but we had to do that out on the lawn. And maybe it was going to be raining, so that wasn't always ideal.
The napkins would blow away. It's a lot to clean up.
So Ruth has this idea. Why not move the house concerts, which we still do, but she had the idea. Why not look for where we live? In the Hudson Valley, we live very, very close to a number of wonderful professional venues, two of which are something called Kotzbahn, which has a long history, well, not that long, but now 15 years or more, of being a home of a major dance festival. It's recently become under new management. They're branching into other genres than dance. And also we live very close to Bard College, which has some wonderful performance spaces.
Including the only Frank Gehry building on the East Coast, the Fisher Center, which is just a spectacular performing arts center set out in the middle of a meadow. One of these, if you've seen the museum in Bilbao or the museum in Los Angeles, this is the concert hall in Los Angeles, the Getty Art Museum. These Frank Gehry,
It's not the Getty, but it's the, but anyway.
The Frank Gehry building, how would you describe them? These bulbous metallic roofs that are all funny shaped and just gorgeous structures. So Bard uses their performing arts center in the summer for their Summerscape Festival, and the primary focus is opera, classical. They focus on they'll do sort of symposiums on a particular composer. They concentrate, but for more popular programming, they bring in and they plant right across from the Fisher Center, also in this beautiful meadow with a little fountain, a little pond, a Spiegel tent. So that's this family in Belgium who's been making for 4 generations these tents, traveling tents that are Spiegel, I guess in German means mirror or glass. And the tents are basically a large white canvas structure, but decorated with chandelier and crystal and parquet wooden floors and red velvet and thousands of mirrors. And it's just a spectacular structure. And there are only something like 16 Spiegel tents in the world now. Many of them, the older ones, were lost during World War II. So the family has just been making new ones. And they travel around the world. And Bard started bringing one every summer for their summer festival. And it seats about 225 people. I mean, you can kind of push it. It's cabaret style. There's dining. There are tables in the center. It's a circular sort of space in the center where you eat. And then there are little banquettes surrounding it on a higher level. And then the stage. And then so they've been doing programming there every summer weekend that's sort of counter programming to the more formal programming in the Fisher Center. And then it turns into a discotheque at 11 o'clock. And it's a big, drag scene, great disco till 2 or 3 in the morning, which for us out here in the country is a lot of fun. They used to have a relationship with a jazz company, and they were doing jazz concerts on Thursday nights. And then Friday, Saturdays are dedicated to more, popular cabaret, bigger performers, really. But after the pandemic, after COVID, they kind of lost their relationship with the jazz company, and we found our way to them, and we got together, and they loved the idea of bluegrass on Hudson. So this will be the second season. We did it last year. We had 5 concerts every Thursday nights, and this year we're doing it again starting July 11th. And we get to curate. We pick the artists and we book the bands, and then we hand it over to Bard and they produce the whole thing. We don't have to do anything. We don't sign any contracts. We don't do any production. We just show up.
Don't have to pick up the crumpled napkins.
We publicize it. We publicize it, but just to our private list. But it's fabulous. So we've got a great lineup this year.
We publicize it to our list of friends of our concert series, but more importantly, Bard publicizes it to their entire list of their vast list all over probably primarily the Northeast, but really the world, of their cultural devotees who are interested in anything that Bard does, and which is often very interesting.
Yeah, we were really thrilled last summer because we didn't know what to expect, but all the concerts pretty much sold out, and the room was filled with people, most of whom we did not know, which was great because it shows that there's a whole new audience of people through the Bard connection that were actually really interested in this music.
And you've got a sort of theme for this year's series, haven't you? Trunks, Roots and Branches, which is described on the website as a series celebrating the contemporary bluegrass and roots music of America, featuring the next generation of talent carrying the tradition forward for a new time. Do you want to talk us through who you've got this year?
Sure. So starting July 11th, we've got East Nashgrass, which we're really excited about. We have not seen them. I think it was Jeff Picker who told us about them originally. He was playing with them at the time, and it just kind of stuck in my ear. And I've been a bit intrigued by East Nashville in general because so many of the artists that we've come to know kind of from the Boston scene in the 2000s, and then from the Brooklyn scene also in the 2000s. Everybody's moved to Nashville. They've all moved to East Nashville. So these guys, just this young, bursting at the seams, it seems, really breaking big band. And I think it's going to be what Peter Rowan said to us when we interviewed him for Bluegrass Journey. He used this great phrase, plowed all the way to the fence bluegrass. And that has kind of stuck. And I'm not, we're expecting that East Nashgrass is going to be kind of that, with that East Nashville, like hipster, tinge. And three of those artists, of course, as you know, and as the listeners no doubt know, are winners of IBMA's Momentum Award. So incredible talent there, no doubt. That's the first week. Then the following week, July 18th, Sam Ryder and the Human Hands, who we love. We've had them at a house concert here. Sam Ryder played a little duet at a local, really fabulous kind of arts colony locally. And those guys, Eddie Barbash playing bluegrass saxophone, it's Latin, Django, jazz, and a little bluegrass. I mean, Sam Ryder plays accordion and piano. He's a brilliant composer. So that'll be another big band, but very original, very beautiful music. And Duncan Wickel, who plays with them, will also be returning later with Lily Henley, which we're really excited about. The third night is August 1st. That's Sierra Hull with her band. So she's the, little bluegrass princess. We're just delighted. She's going to rip up the place. I think people are going to see her in a small venue like that. It's just going to be a blast, I think. Then Lily Henley and Duncan Wickel. Lily has been sort of in retreat a little over the last year or two because she's been working on she's now just gotten her master's, but she'll probably be working towards her PhD in ethnomusicology, and her specialty is Sephardic music. And she grew up as a fiddler, and so she does this original blend of sort of American fiddle and Sephardic music, which is incredible. And then for both her and Duncan, John Doyle, great Irish guitarist and singer, of course, who we love, who's been here a number of times. He's been a major influence on Lillian Duncan. So this Celtic fiddle Sephardic blend, which will be spectacular. And just a duet is so beautiful, so perfect for the Spiegel tent. And then lastly, Jake Blunt Trio on August 15th. And again, another, ethnomusicologist. Jake is working towards his PhD at Brown, but his focus, of course, is Black American string band music. So it should be, I guess the trunk is East Nashgrass or the Roots, or there's a little mix of roots, trunk, and branches in there.
And it's really interesting because you were talking earlier about the documentary, and like the theme of that for you was sort of documenting where new people were taking stuff then. And that's like you watch it now, and it's 25 years on and 20 years on from when it came out, and there's Chris Thile like looking baby-faced, and like he's gone on to be one of the legends of the music. People like Tim O'Brien, who were very established at that point, have gone on to be kind of proper legends of acoustic music. And it's really interesting that the sort of theme of this concert series is just pulling on that thread like across the decades and keeping that going, and just like, where are people taking this? Because there is that I was really lucky to see Snashgrass in a hotel suite at IBMA last year. And I've interviewed a couple of them, but like we're quite lucky in the UK because often when the bluegrass artists come over here, there's not as big a market, so we get to see them in smaller venues over here as well. But there's just something lovely about that idea of these are the people that are moving it forward, because that's one of the things that I find most absorbing about bluegrass, and which I think you did a great job in the documentary of sort of pulling out without it being like a narrative storyline of that, is like this thing of looking forward and back at the same time without sentimentality or nostalgia. It's just kind of using the past as a roadmap to get somewhere else in the future, almost. And I love that as a theme that runs from the documentary through to this series of concerts. And it seems to be, that's the theme that obviously you're going to keep exploring.
Yeah. And I do want to give Pete Wernick credit, because I do think he was the first person who we ever heard use the phrase roots and branches. Yeah. I think that was something he was talking about a lot.
A lot of festivals use it now.
When we were shooting Bluegrass Journey in the late 1990s, he was talking about that.
Yeah, and I think it's a bluegrass as a musical art form. Is so reliant on both true tradition and traditional musical forms that came much earlier, some of which go back to at least the 15 and 1600s, and the child ballads and the British ballads and the fiddling traditions and of mostly of the British Isles. But at its inception, bluegrass was, as I understand it at least, was an effort by Bill Monroe and others around him, but primarily Bill, to create something that was new and that would set him apart from his competitors commercially. So he was looking for new sounds. So the notion of but he was grounded in his musical heritage and his education. How else could it be? What else can it be for anyone? You're grounded in what you have, what you start with. But if you're an artist and a commercial artist and you want to make it, you need to set yourself apart. And one of the ways you do that, the main way that you do that, is to find something new, find your own voice. That's a new voice. But of course, it's grounded in what you know. And in the case of Bill Monroe and bluegrass in general, it's this ancient traditional music, or these ancient tones, as people sometimes refer to them, these archaic sounds that sound like they're as old as the hills. But of course, in a sense, it's an artifice that it sounds so traditional and ancient. It's really, it's been progressive from the beginning. And, of course, it fed into rock and roll and the early days of Elvis Presley and so forth and so on, rockabilly. So that people are still doing that should be no surprise. And, it's sort of, I think it's what's exciting and engaging to us when you get into the music, right? I mean, you sort of, a lot of people find themselves digging back deeper and deeper and deeper and discovering for themselves these early roots, and they're wonderful too. But it's sort of the interface between that great tradition and what's happening that's new that makes the music alive today. We sort of,
excuse me.
We found ourselves, wanting to having that consciousness and that awareness of that, and having the privilege of having some connections and knowing some people where we have access to that kind of work. We've found ourselves in the delightful position of being able to present it in film in our home, and now on venues, professional venues around us here. So yeah, I think that's the story.
Yeah, and it's wonderful. It's that, it's funny because every time I've watched Bluegrass Journey before, I've not been thinking in my head it's not been critically watching it because I need to talk to people about it. It's just been watching it because I like it. But watching it today and thinking to myself, what is the arc of this movie? It's not a history of bluegrass, and it doesn't go, here's a festival, here's IBMA. Like, it cuts between them, but it builds to something. And it sort of builds to that Tony Rice performance almost. And that's kind of this emotional heart of it. But really, it felt like watching I felt like I was watching a family. And here's the family, in a muddy field on holiday, which hasn't gone quite the way they thought, but they're having a great time. Here's the family at IBMA staying in some hotels and sitting up picking all night and doing that. And then here's members of the family at their houses in Nashville or on the road, and it's one of the things I love about bluegrass is, and this is often true of non-mainstream music, I guess, but this idea that you do celebrate the past and the people who've been around for a long time and have been doing it, and you also celebrate the new people, and it just this sort of really warm sense of family was what I got out of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's what we feel too, and it really getting back to kind of where we started. I mean, it's really remarkable that it's been 30 years and it's such a big part of our lives. And it's because it's really a community that we feel we are a part of. And in fact, tomorrow we have a visitor somebody we, met through the scene years and years ago, Joan Cornbliss. She used to work for Voice of America Radio, and we used to see her at every festival. And now it's been years, but she just happens to be passing through. She's coming over, and Darryl Langer stays here all the time when he plays at Grey Fox. I mean, we've developed real relationships with people that are extremely meaningful, and they're central people in our lives.
Yeah,
so it is a family.
I'm far, far earlier in my bluegrass journey than you guys are in yours, but I've been doing this for sort of 3 years now, and nearly everybody that I've spoken to for these interviews, I haven't been in the same room as or the same continent as, but you do start to get to know people a bit. And I went over to IBMA in September and ran into people that I'd interviewed and people who listened to the podcast, and in a little way I'm getting dragged into that world too, and it's a lovely feeling to feel part of something. I think that's one of the most important things as human beings that we need is belonging and all of that, and it's a great music for that.
Yeah, and I'll just amplify. I agree with everything you both just said, and it's about community, and as I think it's not that we talk about it, although I guess we made the final editorial decision to have other people talking about what we wanted to say, but I think it was Ronnie McCoury, maybe it was Tim. No, it was Tim. Who said in Bluegrass Journey, people just want something real in bluegrass music, and the honesty of and I think it was the guy that's also from up on the hillside.
The Italian,
yeah,
who became the String Dusters. That's so funny.
Just Andy
Falco was just like a guy on the hill played every year, would go to year after year. It was going to Grey Fox. They would talk about, like, I got this great table all year long. They're planning what they're going to bring to the festival. And now that's Andy Falco.
But what Andy and what Tim were saying in the film is that people really want something that's real. And bluegrass music there's so little artifice. There's no electronic tuning, voice, modifiers, and there's not much in the way of pedals, if any. And people amplify their instruments, but they're just amplifying their instruments. It's really the way a mandolin or a fiddle sounds on a stage is how it sounds when it's in the room with you. And there's an honesty and a simplicity of the music that forms a kind of bond or a kinship between people who are drawn to it. And it does become a community of there's an honesty to this community of music lovers that I think allows people to bond because they just sort of feel they can trust one another without knowing too much more than the fact that they love bluegrass music. You're going to like them.
Yeah, and it is wonderful, and hopefully, some of the people listening to this will be able to come to the Hudson Valley and experience some of that in that community. But I would really urge everybody else who hasn't seen Bluegrass Journey to kind of go and watch that and experience that as well, because it's such a remarkable thing. And I've had such a cool time talking to you guys about that tonight. I've really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you so much.
Likewise. So nice to meet you. Congratulations on all of your success too. And really very exciting.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for your time.
Bluegrass Jamalong is proud to be sponsored by Collings Guitars and Mandolins, making some of the finest guitars and mandolins in the world since the 1970s. Visit collingsguitars.com and find out why.